March 15, 2024. Marcus Delacroix hadn't killed anyone in 5 years. The man they used to call the King of New Orleans was carving roast beef at his granddaughter's baptism when Vincent Torino walked through his front door uninvited. 300 guests, 20 off-duty cops on his payroll. Vincent had 4 men with him, all carrying. He walked straight to Marcus, grabbed the carving knife, and pressed it against the birthday cake. I know about Judge Morrison. I know about the Riverside Cemetery. 27 bodies, King. 27 reasons you're going to hand me your crown. The room went silent. Marcus smiled, set down his napkin, walked to his study. What happened in the next 10 minutes changed everything the FBI thought they knew about their star informant. Vincent Torino walked in thinking he was intimidating a retired king. He had no idea he was threatening a man who had already written his ending 5 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The study door clicked shut behind Marcus, muffling the nervous chatter from the dining room. He moved to his desk with deliberate calm, fingers trailing across the mahogany surface his late wife had picked out 30 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. Vincent had chosen the one room in the house where Marcus kept his real weapons, not guns. Those were crude tools for desperate men. Marcus Delacroix had always preferred information. He pressed the hidden button beneath his desk drawer. Somewhere in a nondescript FBI field office 15 miles away, Agent Sarah Chen's encrypted phone would be buzzing. Their agreed signal, immediate extraction needed. But Marcus wasn't running. Not today, not with his 3-year-old granddaughter's baptism dress hanging on the coat rack, white as fresh snow, innocent as everything he'd spent 5 years trying to protect. Vincent appeared in the doorway, the carving knife still in his hand. His 4 soldiers fanned out behind him, 2 by the windows, 2 flanking the door. Professional positioning. Someone had trained this boy well. Impressive house, King. My father never got to see the inside. Vincent stepped forward, his voice carrying the particular blend of arrogance and hunger Marcus remembered from his own youth. He died in an alley behind Bourbon Street. Single bullet. Clean execution. Marcus poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon from the crystal decanter. A lot of men died in alleys back then. You'll have to be more specific. Thomas Torino. August 15, 1996. Ring any bells? The glass froze halfway to Marcus's lips. Thomas Torino. The accountant who'd stumbled onto Marcus's ledgers, who'd discovered the Swiss accounts, the exit strategy Marcus had been building for 8 years. The man who could have destroyed everything before Marcus was ready to walk away on his own terms. I remember your father. Marcus took a slow sip. Smart man. Too smart for his own good. Vincent's knuckles whitened around the knife handle. He found out you were planning to disappear, weren't you? 28 years ago, you were already looking for the exit. But you couldn't leave witnesses. Through the study windows, Marcus could see his security team positioning themselves in the garden. Danny Rousseau, his head of protection, had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before Marcus pulled him off the streets. Good man, loyal, the kind who'd die before letting anyone hurt Marcus's family. But Vincent had done his homework. He'd waited until today, when the house was full of civilians, when Marcus's granddaughter was here, when any violence would stain something pure. You think you know the game, son. Marcus set down his glass and turned to face Vincent fully. But you're playing checkers while I've been running chess for 30 years. The game's over, old man. I've got locations. I've got names. Judge Morrison buried under the Convention Center Foundation. Judge Wilkins under the new hospital wing. 2 federal judges, King. You think the FBI won't tear this city apart brick by brick to find them? Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Vincent knew too much. Knew things that only 3 people had ever known. Marcus, his former lieutenant Rico Castellanos, and Rico's been talking to you. Vincent smiled. Rico's been talking to me for months. See, your old friend got nervous when the FBI started sniffing around your construction sites last year. Started wondering if maybe his old boss was making deals to save his own skin. The room shifted. Marcus felt the familiar weight of violence gathering in the air like humidity before a storm. Rico had been his right hand for 15 years, had helped bury half those bodies Vincent was talking about. If Rico was selling information, where is he now? Safe. protected, ready to testify about every grave you two dug together. Vincent stepped closer, the knife catching the afternoon light. Unless, of course, we make a different arrangement. Marcus almost laughed. Almost. The boy thought he was negotiating from strength, but he'd made the classic mistake. He'd revealed his source before securing his prize. Rico Castellanos wasn't safe. He wasn't protected. If he was smart, he was already running, because Marcus had just added his name to a very short, very final list. What do you want, Vincent? Everything. Your territory, your soldiers, your connections, your reputation. Vincent's voice dropped to a whisper. And your granddaughter's college fund. Call it interest on my father's life. The mention of his granddaughter changed something fundamental in the room's temperature. Marcus felt the old darkness stirring, the thing he'd buried 5 years ago when he'd held his dying daughter's hand and promised to be better. But some promises were made to be broken. Outside, a car door slammed, then another. Through the window, Marcus spotted the black SUVs rolling up his circular driveway. Vincent's backup, or something else entirely. Marcus smiled, the same expression that had once made grown men confess their sin. Marcus smiled, the same expression that had once made grown men confess their sins and beg for mercy they'd never receive. Tomorrow, we dive deeper into Marcus's world and discover what Vincent doesn't know about the man he's threatening. If you're invested in seeing how this deadly game of chess plays out, make sure you're following along, because the next move will determine whether the king reclaims his throne or loses everything he spent 5 years trying to protect. Vincent's. Marcus recognized the deliberate spacing, the way they'd positioned themselves to control every exit. Federal. Agent Chen had received his signal and mobilized her team faster than expected. In the old days, Marcus would have felt trapped. Now he felt something approaching relief, until he remembered that Vincent Torino was standing in his study with a carving knife and enough information to destroy 30 years of careful architecture. Expecting company? Vincent's voice carried a note of uncertainty for the first time. Marcus didn't answer. He was calculating angles, measuring distances, feeling the familiar weight of decisions settling on his shoulders like an old coat. Through the French doors leading to the dining room, he could hear his granddaughter's laughter mixing with the nervous chatter of baptism guests. Sweet, innocent sound, the kind of sound he'd forgotten existed until 5 years ago. "Papa's taking forever," came Sophie's voice, high and clear. 3 years old, with her grandmother's green eyes and her mother's stubborn streak. She was probably tugging on her white dress, the one his late wife would have loved to see. Vincent heard it too. His grip on the knife shifted, and Marcus saw the exact moment the young man realized he was in over his head. This wasn't some warehouse meet or back alley negotiation. This was a family home, filled with innocence, with federal agents closing in from outside. "You made a mistake coming here today," Marcus said quietly. "This house is sacred ground." The study felt smaller now, crowded with memory and menace. Marcus's fingers found the silver frame on his desk. Sophie at her second birthday party, chocolate cake smeared across her face, his daughter Sarah laughing in the background. Sarah, who'd overdosed in a tree-made crack house 18 months later. Sarah, whose death had broken something in Marcus that all the violence and betrayal of 3 decades couldn't touch. Vincent followed his gaze to the photograph. Pretty kid. Be a shame if she grew up without her grandfather. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Marcus felt the old machinery awakening in his mind, the cold, calculating engine that had built an empire from nothing, that had solved problems with efficiency and permanence. He'd buried that part of himself when he'd buried Sarah, but it had never truly died. "You know what your father's real mistake was?" Marcus asked, settling back in his leather chair. The worn fabric still smelled faintly of his wife's perfume, even after all these years. It wasn't finding my exit strategy, it was thinking I didn't already know he'd found it. Vincent's composure cracked slightly. "You're lying." Thomas was smart, but he wasn't careful. Started asking questions, poking around offshore accounts. Word gets back in this business, always does. Marcus poured another bourbon, his movements deliberately casual. I gave him 3 chances to walk away, 3 opportunities to take his suspicions and disappear. He chose to stay and dig deeper. The knife trembled in Vincent's hand. "He was trying to expose you, trying to stop a killer. He was trying to blackmail me. Marcus's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Wanted $2 million and a guarantee that I'd never touch his family. The family part I could respect. Man protects his own, I understand that. But the money, Marcus shook his head. Once you pay a blackmailer, you never stop paying. Through the windows, Marcus could see Agent Chen's team taking positions. Professional, quiet, invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Chen herself was probably in the lead vehicle, coordinating with local law enforcement, trying to figure out why her star informant had triggered an emergency extraction during his granddaughter's baptism party. The FBI's here, Vincent said, finally noticing the subtle movement outside. They are. Marcus stood slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Vincent's soldiers had noticed too. Marcus could see them through the doorway, exchanging glances, readjusting their positions. They were professionals, but they were also smart enough to know that a federal raid changed everything. Whatever Vincent was paying them, it wasn't enough to justify a shootout with federal agents. You set me up, Vincent whispered. Son, you set yourself up the moment you walked into my house on my granddaughter's baptism day. Marcus stepped around the desk, closing the distance between them. You want to know what your father discovered? It wasn't just that I was planning an exit, it was that I'd been documenting everything. Every body, every burial site, every corrupt official who'd taken my money. Building evidence for the day I decided to burn it all down and walk away clean. The color drained from Vincent's face. You're lying. Rico didn't betray me to you, Marcus continued, his voice soft as velvet over steel. He betrayed you to me. Has been for weeks, feeding me every detail of your operation, every plan, every weakness. Outside, Sophie's laughter rang out again, pure and joyful. The sound of a future Marcus had spent 5 years earning the right to protect. Vincent raised the knife, but his hand was shaking now, the weight of realization crushing his earlier confidence. Marcus smiled, not the predatory expression from before, but something sadder, wearier. Welcome to the real game, son. Welcome to the real game, son. The blade caught the afternoon light as Vincent lunged forward, desperation overriding judgment. Marcus sidestepped with the fluid economy of motion that 30 years of violence had burned into his muscle memory. His hand closed around Vincent's wrist, applying pressure to the nerve cluster that would make the young man's fingers go numb. The knife clattered to the hardwood floor. Federal agents, nobody move. Agent Chen's voice cut through the house like a cleaver. Marcus heard his guests screaming in the dining room, chairs scraping against tile, his daughter-in-law calling for Sophie. The sound of his granddaughter, crying, high, terrified, sent ice through Marcus's veins. Vincent's soldiers were shouting now, confused commands echoing from different rooms. These weren't men prepared for a federal raid. They were muscle, hired guns who'd expected to intimidate an old man and walk away with a payday. Marcus twisted Vincent's arm behind his back, applying just enough pressure to keep him compliant without breaking bone. Tell them to stand down. Go to hell. Wrong answer. Marcus increased the pressure until Vincent gasped. Those are federal agents out there, son. They've got rules of engagement, protocols, oversight. I don't. Your choice which of us handles your men. Through the study doorway, Marcus could see one of Vincent's soldiers, a thick-necked man with prison tattoos crawling up his forearms, reaching for something under his jacket. Bad decision. Marcus had spent 5 years feeding the FBI intelligence precisely to avoid moments like this, to keep the violence away from his family. But Vincent had brought it here anyway, had forced Marcus to choose between his carefully constructed new life and the survival of everyone he loved. The choice was easier than it should have been. Marcus released Vincent and moved to his desk drawer, not the hidden compartment with the FBI signal, the other one, the one he'd hoped never to open again. His fingers found the Walther P99, weight familiar as a rosary in a priest's hand. Don't make me become what I was, Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to Vincent. The young man was backing toward the window, eyes wide, finally understanding that he'd awakened something that should have stayed buried. You're supposed to be out, retired, gone legitimate. I am legitimate. Marcus checked the weapon automatically, muscle memory from 1,000 similar moments. But retirement doesn't mean defenseless. A gunshot cracked from the front of the house. Then another. Marcus's blood turned to winter. Not because men were dying, but because those shots meant the violence had spilled over into the space where his granddaughter was hiding. He was moving before conscious thought took hold, pushing past Vincent toward the dining room. Behind him, he heard the young man scrambling for the fallen knife, but Marcus didn't care anymore. Vincent Torino had become a secondary problem. The dining room was chaos. Overturned chairs, spilled wine bleeding across white tablecloth, his guests pressed against the far wall while federal agents in tactical gear controlled the scene. Agent Chen stood near the kitchen doorway, her weapon drawn but pointed at the floor, professional calm radiating from her small frame. Sophie huddled in her mother's arms, the white baptism dress stained with grape juice and tears. When she saw Marcus, she reached for him with tiny hands. "Papa!" The loud noises scared me. Marcus holstered his weapon and crossed to them in 3 strides, gathering his granddaughter against his chest. She smelled like baby shampoo and cake frosting, innocent things, clean things, everything he'd been trying to protect. "It's okay, sweetheart. Papa's here." Agent Chen approached, her dark eyes reading the situation with the quick intelligence that had made her the FBI's youngest field supervisor. "We've got 3 in custody, 1 wounded. No civilians hurt. Vincent? Still in your study, I assume?" Marcus nodded, his hand automatically smoothing Sophie's hair. The gesture felt strange after holding a gun, like trying to paint with fingers still stained by violence. "Mr. Delacroix." Chen's voice carried a note of formality that made Marcus look up. "We found something in one of their vehicles, something that changes everything." She handed him a manila envelope, the kind federal agencies used for evidence. Marcus's name was written across the front in handwriting he recognized, Rico Castellanos, but not the Rico he'd known for 15 years. This writing was shaky, desperate, the letters formed by a man running out of time. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph that made Marcus's carefully constructed world crack like ice in spring. The photograph showed his daughter Sarah, alive, taken 3 weeks ago according to the timestamp. Sarah, who was supposed to be dead, who'd overdosed 5 years ago in a house Marcus had burned to ash and memory. Sarah, whose death had driven him to seek redemption with the FBI. Sarah, whose funeral he'd wept through while promising to honor her memory by becoming a better man. The note was brief. "She never died, King. We kept her. Insurance policy. Vincent doesn't know. But now you do. Game's changed. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him. 5 years of careful atonement crumbling like sand. His daughter was alive. The photograph slipped from Marcus's fingers like a dead leaf, floating to rest beside an overturned wineglass. Sarah's face stared up from the hardwood floor, older, thinner, but unmistakably alive. The timestamp glowed accusingly in the corner, 3 weeks ago. Impossible. The word escaped as barely a whisper. Marcus felt Sophie's small weight in his arms, her presence the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. I buried her. I watched them lower the casket. Agent Chen's expression shifted from professional concern to something approaching alarm. "Mr. Delacroix, what exactly—" "Get Vincent." Marcus's voice cut through the chaos like broken glass. "Bring him here. Now." The dining room had gone silent, except for the distant sound of federal agents securing the house. Marcus's remaining guests, his son Michael, daughter-in-law Rebecca, the handful of family friends who'd come to celebrate Sophie's baptism, pressed themselves against the wall like they were watching a stranger wear their patriarch's face. Sophie pulled back to study his expression with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "Papa, why are you shaking?" He wasn't aware he had been. Marcus forced his hands steady, forced air into lungs that felt made of stone. 5 years of sobriety, of legitimate business, of Sunday dinners and bedtime stories, all built on the foundation of his daughter's grave. 2 agents dragged Vincent through the doorway, his hands zip-tied behind his back. Blood trickled from a cut of the ring he'd bought her for her 16th birthday, the one that had been removed before the funeral he'd watched through tears. Vincent was watching his face. He's reached out, hasn't he? Rico doesn't like loose ends, never has. What does he want? What he's always wanted: clean exit, fresh start, new identity courtesy of federal witness protection. Vincent's smile held no warmth. Turns out keeping your daughter alive was just the opening bid. The room tilted. Marcus gripped the edge of the dining table, fighting the vertigo that came with understanding. Rico hadn't betrayed him to Vincent. He'd used Vincent to force Marcus into exactly this position, surrounded by federal agents, his family at risk, his carefully constructed new life collapsing. "How long?" Marcus asked. "How long what? How long has he been planning this?" Vincent's expression shifted, and for the first time, Marcus saw something approaching respect in the younger man's eyes. "Since the day you first met with the FBI. Rico knew you'd eventually sell him out to save yourself, so he made sure you'd have a reason not to." Sophie's voice cut through the revelation like sunlight through storm clouds. "Mama, is Aunt Sarah coming to my party?" The question hung in the air, innocent and impossible. Marcus looked at his granddaughter's expectant face, then at the photograph of his supposedly dead daughter, then at Agent Chen's increasingly concerned expression. 30 years of violence, 5 years of redemption, all of it crumbling because one man had understood Marcus better than Marcus understood himself. Rico was right about one thing: Marcus would never sacrifice Sarah to save himself, even if it meant becoming the king again. Marcus knelt beside the photograph, his fingers trembling as he touched the edge of Sarah's face. The hardwood floor was cold against his knees, but not as cold as the realization spreading through his chest. 5 years. 5 years of grief therapy and sleepless nights like this. But Marcus knew there was no protocol for a man who'd discovered his entire life was built on a lie. The terrible weight of silence pressed down on them all. 5 years of Sunday masses where Marcus had prayed for Sarah's soul. 5 years of avoiding the old neighborhood because every corner held memories of his dead daughter. 5 years of building a legitimate life on the foundation of a grave that held nothing but empty earth. Vincent was right. Rico had understood him perfectly. The king would burn the world down before letting someone take his daughter again, even if it meant destroying the man Marcus had spent 5 years becoming. Marcus stared at the photograph until Sarah's face blurred through tears he refused to shed. 5 years of constructed grief, of careful redemption, of believing his cooperation with the FBI meant something beyond saving his own soul. The silence in his dining room felt like the pause between lightning and thunder, charged with the promise of destruction. "There's more." Vincent's voice carried a weight that made everyone look up. Rico didn't just fake her death, he planned it from the beginning. Agent Chen stepped closer, her hand instinctively moving toward her weapon. "What do you mean, from the beginning?" "The overdose wasn't random, wasn't even Sarah's choice." Vincent's words came slowly, like a man walking through a minefield. Rico had been feeding her drugs for months, small doses, building dependency. He needed her addiction to look real when the time came. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His legs nearly buckled as the implications crashed over him. Sarah's spiral into drugs hadn't been teenage rebellion or the stress of growing up in his world. It had been orchestrated, planned. Rico had poisoned his daughter deliberately, creating the very addiction that would justify her fake death. "You're lying." But even as Marcus said it, memories were reshaping themselves. Rico's sudden concern for Sarah's well-being, his offers to handle the situation quietly, his insistence that Marcus step back, let him deal with Sarah's dealers and suppliers. Vincent shook his head. Rico documented everything. Insurance, he called it. Videos of him giving Sarah the drugs. Medical reports showing the gradual buildup in her system. "He's got enough evidence to prove you knew about it if he needs to." "I didn't know." The words escaped as barely a whisper. "I would never." "Of course you didn't know. That's what made it perfect." Vincent's voice carried something approaching sympathy. Rico understood that the only way to control Marcus Delacroix was to give him something to grieve, something to feel guilty about, something that would make him desperate enough to seek redemption through cooperation. Agent Chen was staring at Marcus with dawning horror. He could see her mentally reviewing 5 years of intelligence, 5 years of Marcus's emotional breakdowns during debriefings, 5 years of his insistence that he was doing this to honor Sarah's memory. Jesus Christ, she breathed. We've been manipulated this entire time. Marcus felt the careful walls he'd built around his new identity crumbling. Every Sunday at Mass, praying for forgiveness for failing to save his daughter. Every meeting with Chen, motivated by grief and guilt. Every legitimate business decision made in Sarah's honor. All of it built on Rico's elaborate lie. His phone buzzed with another message. Bring the boy too. Vincent's father sends his regards from the grave. The words made Marcus's blood freeze. He looked at Vincent with new understanding, pieces of a larger puzzle finally clicking into place. Your father. What was your father's name? Anthony Torino. But you knew him as Tony the Fish. Vincent's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. Rico reached out to me 6 months ago. Said it was time to settle old debts. Marcus remembered Tony the Fish, small-time player who tried to muscle in on dock operations 28 years ago. Marcus had killed him personally, efficiently, the way he'd killed dozens of others who'd threatened his territory. But Vincent would have been barely born then. Rico told me how my father died, Vincent continued. Told me you were planning to retire even then, that my father discovered your meetings with federal prosecutors, said you killed him to protect your exit strategy. The lie was so perfectly crafted that Marcus almost admired it. Rico had found Vincent, fed him just enough truth mixed with carefully constructed fiction to make him desperate for revenge, had turned him into another weapon aimed at Marcus's heart. That's not how it happened. Doesn't matter how it happened. Vincent's composure was cracking, revealing the grieving son beneath the ambitious criminal. Matters that Rico can prove it did. Medical examiner's photos, witness statements, a whole file of evidence that will surface if anything happens to him. Agent Chen was speaking rapidly into her radio, calling for tactical support, for Rico's immediate location, for protocols that might salvage their operation. But Marcus could see the truth in her eyes. They'd been outmaneuvered completely. 5 years of careful intelligence gathering, compromised by one man's perfect understanding of human nature. He's been planning this since the day I first contacted you, Marcus said, the full scope of Rico's manipulation finally clear. Knew I'd eventually turn informant. Knew I'd need motivation to keep cooperating. So he gave me grief, guilt, and the illusion of redemption. Vincent nodded. Rico said you were the most dangerous man he'd ever known because you actually believed you could change. Said that made you easier to control than any of the others. The arrogance of that assessment cut deep, not because it was insulting, but because it was true. Marcus had spent 5 years believing his redemption mattered, that his cooperation with the FBI was erasing decades of blood. Now he understood he'd never stopped being Rico's weapon. He'd just been aimed at himself. The silence that followed Vincent's revelations stretched like a held breath. Marcus felt the last pieces of his carefully reconstructed identity cracking apart, each fragment cutting deeper than the last. 5 years of believing he'd found redemption. 5 years of thinking his cooperation with the FBI meant something beyond his own survival. All of it orchestrated by a man he'd trusted with his life. Agent Chen's radio crackled with static and urgent voices, tactical teams mobilizing, federal resources spinning into motion. But Marcus barely heard it. His attention was fixed on the photograph of Sarah's hand, on the engagement ring he'd given her, on the newspaper that proved she'd been alive while he'd been mourning her death. There's something else you need to know. Vincent's voice was quieter now, almost apologetic. About the meeting tonight. Marcus looked up, noting the change in Vincent's demeanor. The aggressive posturing was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine concern. Rico doesn't plan to let any of us walk away, Vincent continued. Not you, not Agent Chen, not me. He's got 27 bodies to protect, plus everything he's done to your daughter. We're all loose ends now. Agent Chen stopped speaking into her radio. What do you mean? I mean, Rico's been preparing for this moment for 5 years. Building false identities, moving money offshore, documenting evidence that implicates everyone else. Vincent met Marcus's eyes. He never intended to honor whatever deal he made with you. This was always about creating the perfect distraction while he disappeared. The weight of understanding settled over Marcus like a burial shroud. Rico had weaponized his grief, turned his love for Sarah into chains, and now planned to use that same love to ensure his own escape. Marcus would do anything to save his daughter, including walking into a trap that would eliminate the only witnesses to Rico's decades of crimes. "How long have you known?" Marcus asked. "Known what?" "That Rico was planning to kill us all." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus saw something shift in the younger man's expression. Fear, maybe, or regret. "Since yesterday. When he showed me the explosives, the words hit the room like a physical force." Agent Chen's hand moved to her weapon, her training taking over even as her face went pale. "What explosives?" "Enough C4 to level 3 city blocks, hidden in the building where he's keeping your daughter." Vincent's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the tremor in his hands. "Rico said if anyone followed you tonight, or if you brought backup, he'd trigger it remotely. Make it look like a gas leak." Marcus felt the king stirring in his chest, not the controlled violence he'd learned to contain, but the primal fury of a father whose child was threatened. For 5 years he'd buried that part of himself beneath grief therapy and legitimate business meetings. Now it rose like smoke from ashes. "You're helping him." It wasn't a question. "I was helping him," Vincent corrected. "Until I realized my father wasn't the only one Rico lied about. Until I understood that revenge against you meant nothing if it made me complicit in murdering an innocent woman." Agent Chen was speaking urgently into her radio, calling for bomb disposal units, for evacuation protocols, for every resource the Bureau could marshal, but Marcus knew it was useless. Rico had spent 30 years anticipating federal responses. Whatever building he'd chosen would be impossible to approach without detection. His phone buzzed again. This time, the message contained a video file. Marcus opened it with hands that had steadied into the dangerous calm he remembered from the old days. The footage showed Sarah sitting in what looked like a comfortable apartment, reading a book. She was older, thinner than he remembered, but unmistakably alive, unmistakably his daughter. The timestamp showed the video was recorded 20 minutes ago. "She looks peaceful," Vincent observed, looking over Marcus's shoulder. "Rico's kept her comfortable, clean, protected from the life she grew up in." He paused. "She thinks you died in a car accident 2 years after her overdose." Marcus closed the phone 2 years after her overdose. Marcus closed the phone carefully, methodically. Around him, federal agents were coordinating tactical responses and evacuation plans. Agent Chen was arguing with superiors about protocol and acceptable risk. Vincent was watching him with something approaching respect. None of it mattered. For 5 years, Marcus had played by their rules, had trusted their system, had believed that redemption was possible through cooperation and confession. But their system couldn't protect Sarah. Their rules wouldn't save his daughter from a man who'd spent 30 years perfecting the art of staying ahead of consequences. The king was rising, and Marcus wasn't sure he wanted to stop it anymore. "Agent Chen," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the room go still. "I need you to pull your people back. That's not going to happen." Marcus met her eyes, and she took an involuntary step backward. Whatever she saw in his expression made her understand that the man she'd been running for 5 years was gone. "Rico was right about one thing," Marcus said. "I am dangerous when I love something." The point of no return wasn't a line, it was a cliff, and Marcus Delacroix was already falling. The transformation happened in the space between heartbeats. Agent Chen watched Marcus Delacroix shed 5 years of careful reformation like a snake discarding old skin, revealing something underneath that made her remember why the FBI had spent a decade trying to bring him down before he'd offered his cooperation. "You don't understand what you're asking," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Around them, federal agents were freezing mid-motion, responding to an authority that transcended badges and protocols. "I'm not asking." Marcus moved to the window, studying the tactical positions Chen's people had established around his house. His assessment was clinical, professional, the king cataloging obstacles between himself and his objective. Rico chose the meeting location specifically because you can't approach it without triggering his response. Your people will get Sarah killed. Vincent stepped forward and Chen saw something she hadn't expected in the young man's eyes. Respect. "My father used to tell stories about you. Said you were the only man in New Orleans who could walk into hell and come back with what he wanted. Your father never met me." that we give him something he's not counting on. Marcus moved toward the door, and Chen realized with growing alarm that she wasn't going to be able to stop him. Vincent, you know Rico's operations better than anyone. Agent Chen, you know federal resources. I know the man we're dealing with. Chen's radio crackled with updates from the tactical team, but she ignored it. This is insane. We can't just... You can't, Marcus interrupted. But I can, and I will, with or without your cooperation. The finality in his voice made Chen understand that her choice wasn't whether to authorize his plan. It was whether to help him or watch him walk into Rico's trap alone. Vincent stepped forward. If you're going after Rico, you'll need someone who can get you close without triggering his security. And you'll need someone who can ensure Sarah's safety once you find her, Chen added, knowing she was crossing a line that would end her career. Marcus smiled, and Chen saw a glimpse of the man who'd built an empire on calculated risks and absolute loyalty. Rico was right about one thing. I am dangerous when I love something. He opened the front door, and Chen felt the weight of inevitability settle over them all. But he forgot that kings don't fall alone. The old cathedral in Trêmes still held morning mass at 7, just as it had when Marcus was building his empire in these streets 30 years ago. He sat in the last pew watching Father Miguel bless the communion wine, and remembered the first time he'd brought Sarah here, a 5-year-old in a yellow dress who'd whispered questions through the entire service. 3 weeks had passed since Rico's warehouse became his tomb. The official reports called it a gas explosion, same as Rico had planned, but with different casualties. Vincent Torino had proven surprisingly effective at turning Rico's own security protocols against him. Agent Chen had proven surprisingly willing to forget certain details when filing her final report. Sarah sat beside Marcus now, real and breathing and struggling with 33 years of existence she'd been told to forget. The reunion had been quieter than he'd imagined during 5 years of grief. No dramatic embraces or tearful confessions, just his daughter, older and cautious, asking why he looked so tired. Papa? She kept her voice low, respectful of the sacred space. You don't have to keep bringing me here. I'm not sure I believe in all this anymore. Marcus studied the familiar stations of the cross, remembering how Father Miguel used to lecture him about redemption and second chances while counting the bills Marcus donated every Sunday. Neither am I, but he kept coming anyway, drawn by habits that ran deeper than faith. Sarah came too, though he suspected it was more about relearning him than rediscovering God. 30 years of manipulation had taught them both to approach trust carefully. The service ended, and Marcus watched the other parishioners file out. Elderly women who remembered when he was young and dangerous, working men who still nodded with careful respect. Mrs. Tran from the corner market stopped to squeeze his shoulder, whispering prayers for Sarah's continued recovery. The neighborhood had absorbed the story of his daughter's return from rehab with the same practiced discretion they'd once shown toward his other business. Some lies became kindness when spoken often enough. Outside, the morning sun caught the construction crews working on the new community center. Marcus's legitimate business had grown quietly profitable over the past 3 years, though he suspected his reputation still opened doors that his bidding alone couldn't. Vincent managed the day-to-day operations now, approaching honest work with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to revenge. Strange seeing him in a hard hat, Sarah observed, watching Vincent direct a concrete delivery. Marcus nodded. Vincent had chosen to stay in New Orleans, though Agent Chen had offered relocation. Said he needed to understand the difference between his father's memory and Rico's lies. The boy was learning, slowly, that not every debt required payment in blood. They walked toward Magazine Street, past the coffee shop where Sarah worked part-time and the bookstore where she spent her afternoons. Simple routines that felt miraculous after believing her dead for 5 years. She'd asked about her daughter only once. Marcus had shown her photos, told her about Lisa's baptism, explained why some distances were necessary for now. Agent Chen called yesterday, Sarah said as they reached her apartment building. Says the last of Rico's associates took plea deals. All the evidence he'd hidden, it's finally being processed properly. Marcus had expected this conversation eventually. 27 bodies would be excavated from construction sites around the city. 2 federal judges would finally receive proper burial. The files Rico had collected, Marcus's crimes, Vincent's father's real story, 5 years of manipulated intelligence, would disappear into bureaucratic machinery designed to protect ongoing investigations. She offered witness protection, Sarah continued. Said we could start over somewhere else. New names, new lives. The offer was generous, especially considering Chen's own career had survived the warehouse incident only through careful omission and strategic memory loss. She'd been reassigned to white-collar crime in Houston, a sideways move that felt more like exile. What did you tell her? Sarah smiled, and Marcus saw glimpses of the girl who'd once demanded bedtime stories about knights and dragons. I told her I'd already started over, here, with you. They stood outside her building, father and daughter learning the rhythms of ordinary affection. No federal surveillance, no criminal empire casting shadows over every conversation, no Rico pulling strings from behind carefully constructed lies. Just Marcus Delacroix, not quite redeemed, but no longer seeking redemption through other people's systems. The king was gone, buried in the same warehouse where Rico had planned his perfect escape. What remained was something smaller, more fragile, infinitely more valuable. A father who'd found his daughter. A man who'd learned that some victories were measured in mourning masses and construction projects rather than territory and fear. Will you come to dinner Sunday? Sarah asked. I'm making red beans and rice. Marcus nodded, watching her climb the steps to her new life. In the distance, church bells marked the hour, calling the faithful to midday prayers. He'd built an empire on these streets once, ruled through violence and careful calculation. Now he built community centers and attended baptisms, and learned that love, genuine and unmanipulated, was the only redemption worth seeking. The king was dead. Long live the father.